Welcome to the Givology Impact Series podcast, in which we share the experiences and inspirations of social entrepreneurs and change makers around the world in education. I'm Vandana. We are delighted to have Aunnie Patton from Intelligent Impact with us today. Aunnie founded Intelligent Impact in 2017. A reformed M&A investment banker, she began her impact investing career in 2010 with Unitas Capital in Bangalore, and has since worked in a variety of settings across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. She is currently an associate fellow at the University of Oxford Said Business School and an advisor to the Bertha Center for Social Innovation at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. In these roles, she lectures on innovative finance across both schools' EMBA, MBA, Executive, MCOM, and MPhil programs, and she is currently creating a massive open online course, or MOOC, with Coursera. Aunnie's work has been published throughout the world, including by the Oxford University Press, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, the World Economic Forum, and more. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us, Aunnie.
Of course, I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So to start off, to familiarize our listeners, can you describe what is impact investing?
Sure. Impact investing is essentially investing capital, looking for both some sort of financial return as well as a social and environmental return. And it doesn't always mean that you need a full financial return. It's across the spectrum. So it's a strategy of investing that looks at both social and environmental alongside financial.
And what are the differences between impact investing and philanthropic donations?
So there's not really, there's a lot of differences, but what I like to say is that impact investing and philanthropy sit on a spectrum of capital that is designated towards impact. So at one level, you might have philanthropic donors that are willing to take very high risk from a financial and a social perspective, and they might be willing to give their money away. In other cases, you might have philanthropic donors that look to actually recoup some of their capital, so they might be acting more towards the impact investing spectrum. So along that spectrum, you have another area that sits in the middle called venture philanthropy, that often does things where they mix more philanthropic money with more traditional mainstream impact investing. So it's often referred to as a big tent. So all the way from kind of 0% financial return to market rate financial return, and different levels of impact and different levels of essentially social and environmental return. So while a strategy might be different for a philanthropist versus an impact investor, they might actually go into the same investment and operate in different ways. So a philanthropic investor might say, I'm willing to do a guarantee, which means that they would back the investment, whereas the impact investor might put the financial capital up. And they might end up then being in the same type of investment, say providing funding for rural farmers in East Africa, but they might actually, the type of capital they would use might look different. And that's actually one of the strengths of impact investing in innovative finance, is that there's all these different pools of capital to pull from. And that's something that we have going forward that is becoming even more important, linking these different types of investors and philanthropic advisors and philanthropic donors together.
Yeah, that's very useful. And so what are the different types of innovative financing instruments, and how do they work in the developing world?
Sure. So innovative financing, which is my area of speciality, is about exactly what we've just talked about, around that mixing of different types of capital. So my definition of innovative financing is capital that is allocated towards impact, that uses all available philanthropic and mainstream financial tools. And when those don't work, it creates new ones. So what innovative financing often does, and the way that I work with innovative financing, is actually starting from the outcome and working backwards to design financing strategies that can achieve that outcome. So that might be pulling in types of very mainstream capital next to government capital, next to financial or philanthropic donors, next to corporates, next to community donations and community organizers. And so there's different types of innovative financing vehicles, and there's now dozens of them, probably even more than that. It's hard to keep up. But things like guarantees, which I mentioned, you can use very innovatively. Other types of innovative financing vehicles look like things like impact bonds. These are often cited as an innovative financing vehicle. There's funds that are set up with innovative financing structures where different types of capital come into these innovative financing structures. And there's a whole host of different types of vehicles that have been designed with the impact in mind, not just the financial return. And that's why these look a little bit different, and that's why these are interesting, because the capital is allocated based off of the impact often, as opposed to just based off of the financial return. And so it's an interesting place to pull in different types of funders to be able to work towards a single goal, which is, a set of social or environmental outcomes.
And how effective is impact investing?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish we knew more. So one of the things that I'm very excited about, which I think we're going to talk about in a moment, is the role of technology in understanding our impact and being able to measure our impact. Right now, even though impact investing is trying to work towards data-driven capital allocation, i.e. finding the interventions and the projects that are the most effective from an impact perspective and also sustainable, the data we have, is still quite piecemeal. So there's a lot of opportunities to be able to compare different impact metrics across different sectors and within sectors to be able to understand what is the most effective. What we do know is that the conversation is changing. And I think that's probably the thing we can point to that's the most effective around impact investing from the past 10 years. So, this idea of being able to invest well and do good, it still does have lots of resistance, but the conversation has changed significantly from when I first started in this space 8 years ago to now. And, it's different varying levels of return and understanding that there's different ways to do impact investing strategies, and there's not an obvious trade-off between financial return and social and environmental return. And in some cases, what we're seeing with things like inequality and with climate change is actually companies that are addressing social and environmental issues are actually more sustainable and actually a better investment long term. So what's interesting is that the capital is still being allocated, and I guess the jury is still out on the total effectiveness. We definitely have lots and lots of data about how capital has been allocated, but certainly the conversation has completely changed. And now you have every single major bank in the world has an impact investing division or an impact investing expert. We have billions of dollars of financing vehicles that have been done in impact investing. The impact investing market is growing, 30 or 40% a year. And so there's certainly more momentum, and it will be up to us to continue to evaluate this from an effective standpoint. And what is, how is this capital actually behaving? Is it behaving in the ways that we thought it would? And are we having the impact that we need to have?
Right. So in evaluating impact, what kinds of qualitative or quantitative metrics do you look at? Or in other words, how do you measure social impact?
So do we have 5 or 6 hours? Because that's how long I normally teach this in. So, there's one of the things around impact investing, and same thing with philanthropic investing or philanthropic donations, is you choose metrics that work for the type of impact you're trying to have. The IRIS set of definitions that is created by the Global Impact Investing Network, which is available online, has been really useful to give a lot of investors a terminology to be able to understand what to look at when they're looking at farming. What do you look at for measure when you're measuring for around unemployment? What does a job look like? I think there's a lot of interesting pieces to being able to have the language. Then the next step of how do you measure and what does that actually look like really depends on the investor. It depends on the project, and because often it's very bespoke, that's where you often get measurements that it's very difficult to compare. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is the use of technology, particularly blockchain and artificial intelligence, to help us create global impact ledgers that will be able to measure via things like third-party verification, different impact metrics that will be measured globally, similarly, to be able to be compared and be able to be transparent and independently analyzed. So there's a much longer conversation we could have about impact measurements, but I think that's the salient piece there, is that, you know, right now we're measuring in small pieces, and we're often measuring not because we're not trying to be transparent, because it's difficult to be transparent. And I think the future of this industry is going to be incredibly and radically transparent, and also be able to use technology to get into the places that are the most remote, but being able to measure impact in ways that's transferable and it's comparable.
Right, so I know you kind of started an organization on this goal, so can you share with us a little more about the story of Intelligent Impact's founding and mission?
Sure. So, you know, I've been in this space for what is not a very long time for a career, 8 years, but is a very long time, it seems like, for the space, because it's only about 10 years old. And so I've seen a lot of the growing up that it's done, and been really, really privileged to be a part of it, you know, on my multiple continents that I've been working on in the past few years. And what I've realized is that, you know, there's a lot of information asymmetry. There's a lot of issues with people that are new to the space understanding where to go. There's issues with, you know, funders not being able to have the right type of capital and be able to find the right type of organization, and the list goes on and on. And the issues often are not what people think they are. You know, I often start off a lot of my lectures and my conference presentations talking about how I present to hundreds of investors, and everyone in the room tells me there's not enough deals. And then I'll be standing up in front of 300 entrepreneurs, and they'll tell me there's no capital. And both of these are true. So it's the idea of doublethink from 1984. So you can hold both of these things are true, even though they do not work with each other. And that's because the investors struggle with having the right type of capital for the right type of investor, and there's a real mismatch error, and there's also a real distribution error, because oftentimes the need is very small for capital, and the ability to distribute that is very low. So if people need $50,000 loans and you have a $100 million fund, you know, you can't do that level of funding. So the reason that I founded Intelligent Impact was to really start to explore what is the opportunity around artificial intelligence and blockchain to be able to meet some of these issues. And, you know, because both technologies are in their infancy, I think it's a really interesting opportunity to start to build things from the bottom up for impact, as opposed to taking things built for corporates and adapting them, which is kind of how we've done traditionally. The financial markets, we've tried to adapt for impact. You know, corporate and corporate structures, we've tried to adapt for impact. And so, you know, being able to be at the ground level and actually build the platform with impact in mind seems like an incredible opportunity. So the first piece is really I'm starting to build out applications and platforms, working with partners, and really figuring out who exists in the ecosystem, who's thinking about this. And then next year, 2018, is really going to be pushing forward and launching hopefully some of these products, and putting together some meetings and hopefully not, I don't want to say conferences, but, you know, some gatherings around impact and AI and blockchain.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting. And what do you think is the role of AI and machine learning in impact evaluation? Like, what does the future hold?
So imagine a future whereby someone can put up anyone. So let's say Givology gets together a bunch of your funders, and you say, we would love to fund 10,000 girls increasing or becoming literate. So you could put that up onto the global impact ledger. You are willing to fund that. You're willing to pay $10 per girl that becomes literate, and you're willing to do this anywhere in the world. What could happen then is you could have nonprofits or social enterprises that are working around literacy. They could see that, and they could go in and they could essentially provide verification that they had worked with 3,000 girls and had gone from illiterate to literate based off of third-party verification, i.e. either through GPS and cell phones, or through an intermediary that was verifying that these girls were literate, through a test potentially that was put out, the girls were taking, through a school, through an education. Essentially, there might be multiple levels of verification, but then what the nonprofit could do is they could submit their verification of these girls becoming literate, and then there would be third-party verifications. Other people could look at those claims and say, you've already claimed this, or this doesn't make sense, that doesn't exist. And essentially that would all be transparent. And so once that was verified by multiple sources, depending on the type of verification that you would ask for, once that was verified by multiple sources, then the money would automatically be transferred over to that nonprofit. So you could set up a huge project. You could say, right, we're going to get together 1,000 donors, and we're going to put $20 million into water and sanitation within this area of India. And those donors could come from all over the world and put money into these smart contracts that would then be able to be distributed once those contracts are paid, and might even, with artificial intelligence, use good bots to go out and find organizations that are working on those projects to pull them into this funding. So suddenly, instead of having a bunch of donors going on a trip and trying to find organizations and potentially doing diligence, you might have this marketplace out there that is constantly itself seeking out and trying to match these donors with the organizations that are doing the work, and then verifying that they're doing the work and distributing capital. And that can all potentially be done by technology, which reduces the cost, reduces the distribution efforts, and then increases the amount of effectiveness, hopefully, of what's being done and how capital is being allocated.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, actually. So what are some projects your organization is working on?
So we're working on building a supercomputer, essentially. Every time I say it, I'll laugh because it sounds like something out of like a James Bond film. She's a she. Named her Athena, which is the goddess of wisdom. And so the idea is essentially to equip her to be able to do some of this work, and then potentially in conjunction with a few other organizations that are building underlying platforms for blockchain. And I can't say too much about her now because she's a little under wraps, but she's pretty much an impact toddler right now. So she has she's read about 80,000 pages of impact reports and interacted with people a bit, but she's certainly not very capable yet. So it unfortunately takes a while to be able to build the underlying infrastructure and figure out how to get good data to her. But we're working on it, and there's a few great partnerships that I'm building next year that are going to be really pivotal to being able to take her forward.
That's exciting. So what are some kind of obstacles you're facing in evaluating impact?
Everything. So, working within very difficult areas. I live in Cape Town and work in South Africa and other parts of Africa as well as other parts of the world. And, many forms of data are paper-based. So we have done some work with the government here in setting up an impact bond for early childhood development. And, there were times that we had asked about data and were, taken into a room that was just full of boxes with paper-based surveys. And, that can be very difficult, A, to verify, and B, just to be able to understand and comprehend and to figure out where it came from. And there's just so many pieces there. And then the other thing around, evaluating impact is there's there's a lot of preference that goes into it. So I might be really passionate about female education, and someone else might be really passionate about the environment. And in most cases, those should go hand in hand, but there might be times in which, you know, a human might have an impact on the environment that would be a positive impact for the human, but a negative impact for the environmental considerations. And so, you know, it can be difficult to be able to compare across sectors. And it's also just, it's difficult to understand where information comes from and what it means. So, you know, what's going to be interesting about potentially using technology to be able to at least get the data around impact is to allow individuals then to, you know, make preferences based off of those data around how they allocate by their finances and their capital. So there's going to be a lot of issues. One of the things we're facing specifically in this area of using the technology to be able to create, you know, these global impact ledgers is that there's probably going to be quite a few competing organizations that are going to try and do it. And that's fine, and that's great. Competition is amazing. But I think one of the things I'm definitely going to continue to try and do is pull together these different organizations and individuals that are working on it to try and make sure that we're working, you know, kind of hopefully towards a similar a standard and goal. I mean, we're working towards the same goal, like that's a similar standard and platform, because it is, you know, concerning that we might end up having 15 different platforms, like we have 15 different ways of measuring impact, or 150 ways of measuring impact. So, you know, the real goal is hopefully that we can standardize and everyone can get together and around, you know, a specific way of speaking about it. The organization that's done the best job so far around evaluating impact and getting the whole industry together is called the Impact Management Project. And their reports are absolutely worth reading. They are worth their weight in gold. They've worked with almost everyone in the industry to really come to terms with how do you think about language around impact and cross-sector, and it's really excellent. And so it'll be building off of work like that you know, this global impact ledgers will have to be constructed, hopefully, to be able to work for everyone.
That's really exciting. So just lastly, what are your goals for the years to come, and what can our listeners do to help?
Whew, the world's going to change quite a bit in the years to come, hey? So, you know, my hope, my real hope is that, you know, when I started teaching impact investing about 6 years ago, I would spend the first part of probably several classes, you know, trying to have students understand that there's the opportunities to be able to do well, to invest well and do good. And now when I start out, it's, you know, that's not the question. So the question is, well, how do I do it? Not oh yeah, that's, you know, it's people, a lot of students, and a lot of times at conferences and presentations, and, you know, that idea of being able to do this and do well and, you know, make money and, you know, allocate capital is understood. And I think some of that comes from millennials, and some of that just comes from the data that we have now around impact. And so the conversation moves on from, you know, is impact investing possible, to how do I do it? And so what I'm really hoping is that we have a similar thing around the technology is, you know, right now we're asking a lot of questions about, is it possible? And then, you know, hopefully the next piece that comes in the next few years is, it is possible, this is what the ledger looks like, how do we make it better? So, you know, right now impact investing is, the impact measurement piece of impact investing is actually something that's constraining the growth of impact investing. And so if instead it turns into an enabler, and technology suddenly gives us the ability to, you know, really measure impact in a way that is standardized and very effective, then potentially the opportunity for a lot of millennials and a lot of individuals, I'm sure, that are listening to this, is to just find ways to allocate capital using that technology. So what I would say is, for those of you that are listening, that have gotten this far, I would say, continue to be risky in what you're thinking about funding and supporting, whether it's with your capital or with your time or your energy or your connections, because the world's going to change very quickly with technology. But we have a great window these next few years to ensure that some of the system is built with the social and environmental impact in mind, not adapted because it needs to make sure that it's going to mitigate risk, but really built with that in mind. So, if there's the resources to be able to do that, then there's going to be lots of really intelligent people around the world that are going to be building platforms that are actually going to make sure that the technology is creating impact as opposed to just creating harm. And I think that's going to be a really important element to what happens in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for taking the time to participate in our Impact Series podcast. We're really excited to continue following your work and the many exciting developments to come.
Excellent. Thank you so much.